I don't want somebody who's seen the latest, LS or I Will Dominate or Cage thing. They know they know that this is the big topic right now. We're going to go and talk about blitzscrims. Okay, you want to talk about blitzscrims? How are you going to apply them?
This is Peter Dunn, the current head coach of Team Heretics, the head coach that brought EG their first and only title, and one of the most respected coaches in the field. He has over 10 years of experience coaching, having worked in China, Brazil, North America, and Europe. In part 1 of this episode of the LS show, we talk about the advantages that coaches have in Europe.
Europe has a very, very large and successful tier 2 ecosystem.
The value of a coach, especially to veterans.
Even for somebody such as myself, it was often very, very hard when dealing with veterans to prove that that I had anything to offer.
The dynamics of player-coach relationships.
But why does Enyoyo want to work with Rotten? Why does Super? Why do? Because they've worked with him for years in academy.
And the undervalued importance of team culture to a team's success.
Who's the best coach in the world right now? I would argue it's Tabe. But when he was in Brazil, he did really badly. His results in Brazil were not good results.
So you've coached now in NA and EU, and obviously Brazil and China way early on. What are some differences you've seen between coaching in North America versus in Europe?
Okay, so I think that basically in North America, the the difference in balance of influence of the coach is different. And I would put this as I would say that you look at, especially in China and from what I've heard about Korea, the like input value of a coach is much higher, right? So if I use some like arbitrary numbers to kind of describe it, I would say, the value of a coach in Europe is about 1-to-1 with a player. In Korea, it's about 3, and in NA, it's about 0. 0.8, 0.5, something like this. But I, it's more a case of you can go. Everything within a team is decided by some amount of consensus. It's not just one person saying we do things in every kind of single way, but it's the value that the coach's opinion, that the coach's word has, is very, very different in North America compared to what I've seen in other regions.
Why do you think that is? Why is it? There almost feels like there's a disrespect of coaches in North America, even though in sports we respect them very highly. And like when I was playing soccer or football, you didn't get a say in what the coach said. But when it comes to League of Legends, it's almost like maybe because we have a lot of coaches that aren't very good that we devalue coaching, and then when good coaches come, we don't give them full we don't give them full control so that they're not fully responsible or accountable, and it's like a cycle. Like, what do you think?
So I think that there's three things at play here, right? Firstly is the difference between conventional sports and esports, right? Especially League of Legends, which is that the game changes fundamentally every single off season and multiple times during the year. So normally the big benefit that a coach has in, for instance, soccer, is that the cumulative experience that you gather over years gives you an information advantage over the players that you're kind of working with, especially if you're working with younger players. If football does change, but the fundamentals within the game stay pretty similar over time. Sometimes some coaches have differences in philosophies, but essentially it's 22 players chasing a ball around the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
League of Legends is the characters you pick, the way the draft functions, the way that a lot of other things within the game function mean that this kind of accumulated knowledge kind of disappears every kind of off season, and it's often about how fast people kind of adapt. Doesn't mean the coaches can't do it, but obviously players who are playing at like the highest level, especially in solo queue and things like this, have a natural advantage, right? Okay, so first. Second thing, the esports, especially in the West, started without coaching at all. I remember, was it season? It must have been season 2 Worlds with CLG EU. I remember like uh, joking around with some of the CLG EU members, because I was there as like a support staff, um, and the the idea when you kind of talk to even European players back in season two that you would need a coach was just completely alien, you know. And if anything, Riot kind of enforced coaches on Western teams, you know. Like there were some people around at the time who did some kind of coaching. My GM, arent is one of those people that he was doing what we would call coaching today. Even without kind of a formal role, but it was kind of enforced on the teams by Riot. And what the people who became coaches at the start didn't necessarily have that kind of skill set to immediately. Uh, it wasn't clear what kind of skill set you needed when you were kind of looking for coaches. And obviously, there's a lot of coaches that I don't want to say that coaches who came in at the start were incompetent because there's a lot of coaches, top coaches now, who were coaching right at the start who are still around. People like Yamato Cannon, people like Dylan on G2. These people they've been around since the start of kind of coaching being recognized as a profession in the West, but it was never kind of acknowledged as a key building block to what made a team successful, right? The difference, of course, with Korea is really, really stark. You have coaches who come in from the StarCraft era. In StarCraft, you had coaches, right? So obviously, in League of Legends, you would have coaches. In China, there were coaches too at the start, mainly because of copying of the of the kind of Korean model. But you see in China, especially, I mean, I just give the obvious example, which is arent, who is the legendary world elite EDG coach, who was somebody who was there at the start, kind of helping teams, and other teams as well had these kind of support staffs, and they. I'm not saying that you were paid huge amounts as a coach or anything, right? But the idea that you would need a coach was just kind of accepted. It was just a starting point that it was accepted, right? That a coach would be there, and what a coach would need to be able to provide was already being kind of investigated and kind of worked out from an early stage. So kind of the West, and by this I mean Europe, both Europe and North America, has been playing catch up ever since. What's the advantage that Europe has had? Europe has a very, very large and successful tier two ecosystem. And I think Europe has benefited because obviously LCL and TCL don't exist anymore for various reasons. LCL, of course, being Russia, TCL being Turkey. But if you were somebody who couldn't find success or couldn't get recognized within Europe, you had the option to go to minor regions. And you saw this with players. Obviously, Bwipo went to Russia. I think he was in LCL. I'm pretty sure he was in LCL. But Caps, Humanoid, um, some other people, Xerxes, another one. They came up through Turkey because obviously b- to kind of get their break, and obviously there was the other route where people like Nemesis, for instance, came up through the European ecosystem. So you had all of these different parts. You had the French league, you had the Spanish league, you had the Russian league, you had the Turkish league, you had all of these ways, French league, yeah. You had all of these ways that people could practice their coaching, establish their coaching, and kind of get this first-hand competitive experience. Even in worlds qualifying regions. Before you kind of got a shot uh, at LEC. And I think that the important thing here is that you didn't have to make so a lot about coaching in esports because it's a new industry, right? Like it's a new profession, in the West. People don't necessarily, we're kind of writing what is, we're writing the book of what is effective esports coaching in the West right now. Um, and in order to be able to come up with the right answer, people have to make mistakes. But the mistakes that were being made in Europe were being made in Turkey, they were being made in Russia. They weren't necessarily being made in LEC level. And this meant that you had a lot of coaches who were put in a position where they could gain this kind of experience and even today, when Heretics had a coaching open application coaching system. We had 152 applicants. I'd say maybe three or four of those were people that were not really like people that were, I mean, just kind of fans applying for a position on the off chance that they get recognized. But I'd say like 148 of those people had some amount of tier two experience either at ERLs or in Latin America or in Brazil, or like we got international applicants, right? Or in Europe or in Turkey, right? But people always have this experience, and what this means is, firstly, you can see how they learn from their mistakes. You can see how they interact in a team environment. You can see how they interact with management. You can see what their approach towards risk is. You can see what kind of personalities they deal with. And this kind of experience in North America is really, really lacking. Because if you look at the North American system, what have you had for years? You've had the LCS at the top, but Academy is not a competitive league. I mean, it's competitive in that you want to win, obviously, but the top prospects in North America don't always win in an academy. I mean, JoJo was famously like a 10th place academy mid laner, right? Like, I remember when he got promoted, people were saying, "Oh, look at his stats in academy; they're so trash," right? But your goal as a coach in academy is not to win academy. Your coaching is to develop players, right? And sure, there are some teams that went for this approach and tried to win. But the value of this, you look at, I don't want to call out individual names, right? But you look at some teams in the past that have chosen uh, to go the we will win academy no matter what route. They they didn't get value from their academy system, but it's interesting that a lot of the time, the best way to kind of build your CV and show value of yourself in North America was to kind of win academy, right? This was the way that you would prove yourself. But lots of teams were not trying to win, and the easiest way to win academy is to just sign a lot of veterans and to just go along with what they say, right? So you're not actually developing your coaching, right? You're
Mhm.
kind of you're building a better roster in a league where not everyone is playing to win, and yeah, and kind of going from there. So yeah, so that's what I would say. You know, we always have to think that North America has always been behind in this regard, and it's really, really hard to play catch up. I think that as collegiate has become more developed, we've maybe kind of seen things develop in that area. Um, I know, for instance, that Artemis, who was my assistant slash strategic coach on EG in 2021, he's now on he's now in collegiate. There's a lot of other Jensen Go was in collegiate back in the day, but there only used to be one or two teams which could get proper coaches. But I think collegiate is kind of the one way that you kind of had to develop. Obviously, when the circuit opened up as well, in 2022. 2021 or 20 it's my memory is mixed, right? But when you had kind of the amateur teams also coming in competing, that must have been 2021, 2022. um, then you had other opportunities for coaches to kind of show their ability in kind of competitive we must win settings. Um, but you didn't have this before, right? When academy was your only league, where's a coach going to get their kind of competitive experience? So I would say that this is kind of a handicap that North America has had for a long time. If that kind of provides a good framework for where we are right
It
now.
does. We can branch out in a couple of ways, but first I want to ask, out of the 152 applicants, were there any North American coaches that applied?
Yes, there was one coach which kind of I can kind of talk about kind of our tier list. We had kind of four coaches that were really, really like top tier S plus coaches, people that kind of I recommended to other teams, multiple other teams. We had kind of uh, we had kind of a second tier which was kind of 5 to 15, and there were two NA coaches in that kind of 5 to 15 tier, and then we kind of had a 15 to 60, and then like a 61 to plus. I think is how we would say it. Interestingly, did either of those NA coaches actually get any teams? One sec, I'm just doing a quick.
Sure, take your
I'm doing a
time.
quick. I think one of them. I think one of them got a team, but I don't think the other one did. Yeah, okay. So one of them got a team, and is head coaching in North America. The other one, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have a team. So yeah. So there was talent in North America, and there is some kind of coaching talent, but it's very hard to kind of prove yourself, and it's very hard to have your ideas tested. And yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit more about this later. But yeah, but we had kind of 8 applicants who applied. I think I can say that. Yeah, we had 8 applicants who applied for North America. I'd say two of them were kind of I don't want to say B tier. B tier sounds like,
Yeah.
let's call it A tier, right? We call like 1 to 4 S, and then we had a couple of A tier coaches, a couple of B tier coaches, and yeah. But it was definitely better than in kind of the 2020 to 2021 off season, where it was really really rough.
Well, to talk about that offseason, you had mentioned that you didn't really get good vetting in terms of teams like vetting you to be their coach. You interviewed for like 6 North American teams, and really only EG was the one that did what you consider good vetting. And then you had 34 applicants of coaches to work with you, and 33 of them were not what you wanted to see.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think we have coaches that are not, it almost seems like coaches don't try to prove themselves in North America. And Revenge, when he was still on IMT Academy, I think this was back in 2020 before he moved up, he said that like in Academy, our coach never coached us. He almost gave us, sometimes he would give us an LCS VOD and say, here, learn, and didn't really do the coaching, and almost like was a, I don't want to call him a paycheck stealer, but didn't actually try to improve as a coach, and didn't try to set structures so that he could prove like, hey, look, I took this 10th plate academy and I taught them these fundamentals of the game, or I taught them this or that. It almost seems like we don't try to improve ourselves, but rather impress management so that we can get the next promotion. And I don't know if that's just the sentiment that I get as a fan, um, and I think the sentiment is shared as well, or if it's different as someone who's actually like interacted with coaches there. It almost feels like Brazil has more um, passion about coaching than North America.
Okay. So I think that basically it's worth saying that what the way that the ecosystem was in 2020 to 2021 was very different to how it is now. Okay, firstly, because remember that the tier two scene in North America was only academy coaches before then, and over the last 2 years we've had whatever the tier two ecosystem is called now. Like where academy teams were competing with
Challengers, I think.
yeah, challenges or they rebrand it like
Mm.
every couple of years, right? So I don't know what it's currently called, but the pool of candidates that you had was not very very strong back in those days. So that had a knock-on effect of okay, if you don't know who's strong, pick somebody who you can at least think will be stable, right? And obviously, I think the criteria that people were applying, I don't know, maybe that were applying to me were not very good. I will say of the 6 teams. I think EG vetted me really well. I think there was one team. I don't want to say all of them were the vetting process was bad, but there was one team which we started the process, but then a decision needed to be made, and they weren't in a position to make a decision quickly. So I would say that maybe we'll say one and a half. One and a half. I had one and a half process rather than just one. But I would say that a lot of that kind of experience has gone and moved across to other teams now, right? I don't want to dig too much into uh, issues around the org for EG, but it's clear that EG had a good system for bringing in coaches, and a lot of those people that were there with EG are now, of course, on other teams. You have Andrew Barton, who's now on FlyQuest. You have Greg Kim, who was on CLG, who's now he wasn't brought forward with NRG, but he was part. He had insight into that system about kind of how to bring in coaches, and obviously people don't stay static over time. It's just that there's a long way kind of to catch up. Okay, so I just want to lead with that. Sorry, because of the doorbell, I kind of lost my track. What was the question exactly about?
It was more about like coaches in the lower tier systems not trying to improve as coaches and trying to impress
Uh,
management.
okay, okay. Yeah, so I think basically that kind of so I don't necessarily think that those issues are kind of the case anymore. I mean, the best way to get kind of your chance as a coach before was to go and work through an academy system, just toe the company line, and hope that your roster was good enough so you could go and put on your CV, I won in NA Academy, right? Like that's the way that you would kind of prove yourself. The in 20 so. before 2023, so I say in 2021 to 2022, the most impressive way from to get recognized as a coach was actually not to work in academy at all. It was to go and work on a team like Cincinnati Fear or Supernova or like, a team that had lower resources and prove that you can kind of beat these academy teams, right? That was a good way to like to get recognition. Obviously in 2023, I mean kind of the damage that has been done in 2023 for all kinds of reasons, it frustrates me a lot. I mean, I've been vocal about this. The franchising agreement came into place, which is that you block access to the LCS um, because you have a franchising model. But in exchange, the teams invest kind of in the region to ensure that you have a good infrastructure for raising up new talent, right? And obviously, for financial reasons, that kind of bargain no longer sat in place in 2023. And obviously, the way that it was handled was not very good. But if you're talking about coaching within the new system, how do you do it? You do it through coming out through challenge. We now is a competitive is now a competitive system, which is similar to Europe, but with fewer resources attached and less professionalism. Um, and I think I think in one sense, it's bad that coaches have a stable income, which allow them to do this full time. But in another sense, if you want to show your value coming uh, into the LCS, this is kind of one way you can do it. The other thing is that there was no because promotion. So if you think about how a coach gains legitimacy,
Mm-hmm.
by demonstrating their value. Often you would demonstrate it in the lower leagues, right? And then you kind of prove it. And the players that you coach are essentially there to vouch for you, right? They are the biggest people to kind of justify what you have to provide. And I'm going to say that in North America, even for somebody such as myself, it was often very, very hard when dealing with veterans to prove um, that I had anything to offer, right? It wasn't hard with some of the rookies because I worked with them for a whole year before they came up. It was very very easy to go and say, this is what I have to offer you. This is like this is what I'm providing to you, right? But you imagine a player like Vulcan or Impact, they come in, right? Like if they haven't worked with proper coaches before, half of the thing that you're doing as a coach is trying to demonstrate how you will provide value to them, right? Um, So the fact that in North America so few players get promoted, the knock-on impact of this is where coaches getting their legitimacy from when they're coming and joining a new team. It's hard enough when you've already got a player like you look at Crusher, right, who came up with
Mm-hmm.
Fnatic, and he had Rooks as kind of somebody who worked with him, but obviously Rooks didn't work out for Fnatic. Then it you know even looking from the outside, it's really really obvious what happened, right? He came up into Fnatic, he wasn't a good mix for what they wanted, and then he was kicked after I think it was like the first split, winter split, right? So he had,
Yeah.
and Fnatic started late because they were at Worlds, so he'd had basically 20 scrim days with the team. He had 20 scrim days and 9 matches, and then gone. So it's difficult in Europe, but you look at people who kind of come up. You look at somebody like Melzet, right, who's on Mad Lions now. Why is Melzet? Why does Adyoya want to work with Melzet, right? Rumored. I can't go into details of this, right? But why does Elyoya want to work with Melzet? Why does Super? Why do? Because they've worked with him for years in academy. Elyoya Melzet was Elyoya's coach in Spain Division 2, and I think Spain Division 1. Like I'm a bit fuzzy on it, right? But why is Elyoya coming and saying he wants to go and work with an ERL coach? It's because this is somebody who he's worked with in the past and who he can, in a sense, justify, right? Like he can go and vouch for this person and which rookie coming in to a North American team is going to have either the agency, the power, or like the knowledge to go and say, this is a coach I work with in the academy. I want him in the LCS, right? And I Mad's decision making is something which obviously like I disagree with, but the fact that they can make these kind of decisions says a lot. You see similar things with SK. You see similar things with certain other teams, certain Fnatic, another perfect example. Nightshare, Humanoid. They've worked together before in the ERLs, and they've worked together in a competitive environment, right? And this is something as well. Like it's ironic, but the lack of the lack of opportunities for North American talent to get promoted means that one of your main ways of getting legitimacy within as a coach is taken away. So what's your path to promotion? It's to, for lack of a better word, suck up to management, right? Like, and say fancy things to people that don't really understand esports very, very well. Use really, really good buzzwords. I'm really bad on the buzzword checklist, but one of the funniest things that I've ever seen is Kelsey Moser. She did like a buzzword checklist, of things you
Yeah.
need to kind of say in an interview, which is like one of the funniest things I've ever. I don't know if she's put it on her YouTube channel or something, but people should definitely go and find it. But there's like 15 buzzwords that you need to go and say, and buzzword topics, for people that don't really understand esports very well, and I think this became the way that people would kind of prove themselves, right? And it's funny because you mentioned those 30 plus coaches, right? But some of those coaches got hired by other teams, right? And obviously, like the first thing that happened in the interview, you try to use buzzwords, right? I'm just going to push you, right? Like if you go and interview somebody who's worked in the scene for a long time, who understands the scene, you go and use a buzzword. I'm going to go and push you for the concept. I don't want somebody who's seen the latest, LS or I Will Dominate or Cage or thing. They know that this is the big topic right now. We're going to go and talk about blitz scrims. Okay, you want to talk about blitz scrims? How are you going to apply? How are you going to apply them? What are you going to do if your players don't agree? What are you going to do if your players don't agree? You force it on them, and then they start to fuck around, right? And like they don't take these scrims seriously. How are you going to prove that they're not taking seriously? How are you going to justify to your players, if you do not see immediate results, that this is something that you want to continue doing, right? And they can justify the blitz scrims. They can justify, oh, I'm gonna come down. I'm gonna stamp my authority. They're gonna go and do whatever the coach says. Okay, prove it. Tell me how. Convince me right now. I'm gonna role play a player. Convince me right now that it's the right thing. And you will see that these kind of people who don't have this in-depth knowledge, who haven't bothered to think about these kind of things, and who haven't been in a real life situation with real players where they're trying to kind of justify their methods, they'll crumble immediately. Like you can see it in an interview. You can see it happening in real time, where they haven't been pushed in these kind of areas. And maybe that's a failure of the system as well, that they're not prepared to kind of have these systems. So I think that when we talk about coaching in North America, it's all very well to go and say, oh, there's no competent coaches, right? But the second thing you want to go and say is, what has the region done to kind of enable these coaches? And I'm not saying the EU, like LEC, has done a lot to enable EU coaches, right? Like the reason why EU coaches are generally better than North American coaches is because they've had to prove themselves in competitive scenarios for many, many years. And if you haven't been successful, you're gone like that, right? Like it's kind of like a survival. It's a kind of survival of the fittest. And there's just more opportunities to kind of prove yourself and to make mistakes and to kind of learn from your mistakes. And if a coach comes to me and tells me they've never made a mistake in their career, I know they're also bullshitting, right? It's just a case of, you know what I mean, right? Uh, the problem is, yeah, and I would say that in North America, because the expectation is that you're going to be bad from the start, you don't have that. Like coaches aren't signed long term, or maybe they are now, but in the past were not signed long term, so there's no long term project. You have to justify yourself to the org at all points, right? There's no stability, there's no long term planning, right? Because you're scrambling to just make sure that you can stay in the position as quickly as possible. And sometimes this means sometimes improving as a coach means standing up to management and coming and saying, "This is my idea. I want to go and you've hired me as a coach. Give me the time to prove my idea, and if not, fire me, right? But if you know that the first time you're fired as a coach is the end of your career, you're never coaching again in esports. It, you know how can you come and make it takes a very brave person who has to be very, very sure in their methods to come and make that to come and say to their GM, let me do my job and fire me if it doesn't work, right? But sometimes that's something that you just have to do. But again, are your fundamentals strong enough with the 1 or 2 years of academy coaching that you've had, which is not the same as working with top international players, right? It's very, very different. Um, so I think that's a little bit about it. I think also content. I think one of the things I often tell coaches is they should do content. But one thing I've heard from other coaches, and this I didn't realize how bad this was within the North American scene, is that people just repackage content. They see a video that they like and then they just go and make it their own. And they go and claim that this was their idea, which can be very, very frustrating if you're a coach trying to make a name for yourself. But at the same time, you know, when at least I'm into, so I can't talk for everyone else's interview process, right? But when I'm interviewing, I don't care. Like the concept that you are trying to show in your YouTube video is not something that is necessarily going to be new to me. What I care about is how you kind of structure your approach, right? But this
Hmm.
is obviously because I've worked in esports for a decade and I know what I'm looking for when I'm looking to hire a coach, and I know when I interview for a coach, I'm not interviewing for current knowledge. I'm interviewing for potential, right? I'm interviewing for your fundamentals. I'm interviewing your improvement process, your like logical reasoning. I don't care if you make some mistakes in your case study, right? Obviously, you can't make 20 mistakes in your case study, but you miss like say there's 8 points in the case study and you miss two of them. I don't care, right? Like what I care about is your fundamentals. But if you are trying to justify to somebody who has less knowledge of esports, they're going to try to hire you based on your current knowledge, or at best case, they're going to, on your current knowledge. But worst case, and this is what historically happened, they're going to interview you based on who's vouching for you. You get a nice vouch from Double Lift or Bjergsen, there, yeah, you're set, right? You get a vouch from I'm just using Palafox because he's been successful. You get a voucher from Palafox in 2018 or something. What does that give you? It doesn't give you anything, right? A voucher from Palafox in 2023 probably pretty valuable, right? But
Yeah.
obviously, like I mentioned Palafox because everyone knew Palafox was going to be LCS, right? Like one day, right? Everyone knew he was going to be good, right? Uh, Maybe not LCS champion, but they knew who. But even from somebody like a Palafox, right? How what is that worth to an org, right? They're going to go with a vouch from somebody else, assuming that they're not just they have a good system for judging game knowledge, which I doubt that most orgs back in 2020 2021 off season, uh, at least from my experience, seem to have, right? So, but obviously we have a lot of new GMs now. We have a lot of improve knowledge. People knowledge always improves. There's coaches that I've interviewed in 2016 who were completely awful, who are like pretty good in 2022, 2023. People improve over time, right? And so does the scene as a whole.
Yeah, I do think that the head coaches, at least that we have, FlyQuest with Abadage and Golden Glue, at least people who have done this before, or at least were players who have like Golden Glue proved himself in, with DSG and whatnot. So I do think it is improving, like you said. Um, but I did want to touch on a very common phenomenon that used to happen where we would import not just players but coaches because we
Hmm.
didn't have this tier 2 tier 3 coaches that we could train, develop, and then promote. And one thing that I noticed is you kind of mentioned it too, is that we don't give them full all the resources. We don't set them up to succeed. And I think we do that often with players, like for example Ruby. I don't think he was given any opportunity to succeed, and then his career's over. But
Yeah.
also people like Song, who would who would win a world championship, and then come here and then not be able to make playoffs.
Hmm.
And he's been here multiple times. He's just an example. But I do think we have tried to bring in coaches, not just from Europe or Korea, but also, I don't know if you remember, but in 2015, I think, or 2016, TSM tried to bring a sports coach. I think his name was
Yeah.
like Kelsey or something. And he was just, as someone who's played sports, like I don't know. He played baseball, so maybe it's different. But
Yeah.
it just seemed like they were picking the wrong people, not giving them the tools to succeed, and then saying, "Oh, coaching sucks. Coaching isn't real."
Uh, of course. Exactly right. And you remember that you are trying to justify coaches to groups of players who've never had to have coaches to succeed. Because the people who are winning in 2015, they've won through themselves. They haven't won because of coaching, right? So I think you're putting these people into a hostile environment. I don't think the environment is as hostile now as it is back then, but it was definitely hostile back then. And just hoping that they're going to provide value, right? And often, the thing that will get the most respect from players that you work with is not, you know, telling them that they're going to, an extra hour sleep is going to improve performance 5%, right? Or 10, I don't know the figures, right? I'm not. But it's, this is how I'm going to teach you the Syndra LeBlanc matchup. And, how do you expect a baseball coach to know Syndra LeBlanc better than like Jensen or Pierre? It's just not happening, right? Like, um, so this is kind of the problem you have. The other problem is, of course, that people back in the day didn't think about cultural differences. Who's the best coach in the world right now? I would argue it's Tabe, but many people, but I think most people would say Tabe is a top five coach in the world, right? But when he was in Brazil, he did really badly. His results in Brazil were not good results. And that's because of a cultural difference. The way that League of Legends works in China is very different to kind of the environment in Brazil. Brazil, you have to be more open. You have to care more about your players as human beings than you would in China, right? Like I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. And that human touch was more important, right? Which is something that uh, you know was provide like if you talk about human touch within kind of Tar-based teams, it was provided by Chris, right? So I don't know if people know who Chris is, but like he was the kind of the head coach of Royal Club back in the day. And he was when Tabe played AD carry, he was his support. But this kind of thing wasn't necessary for him to have to succeed as a coach in China, and that when he came to Brazil, it was very, very hard. I think if you put Chris into Brazil, he would have done well. I don't know if he still coaches these days, right? But back in the day, that's an example of somebody who nobody with any knowledge of League of Legends would dispute that Tabe is a good coach. You just look at BLG, like you just look at BLG before he joined, and you look at BLG after, right? And I don't think BLG were like a top three team in the world, but like they performed like it for most of the year, right? Um, so give that example, right? So firstly, there's that. Second thing is just because a coach is Korean doesn't mean that they're like Rigby, e.g. C9, Clutch, like Africa, he's not a good coach because he's Korean. He's a good coach because he's a good coach. He just happens to be Korean, right? Like the Korean part is the kind of ecosystem that he's grown up in, right? Like it's the structure that he's grown up in. It's the contacts that he has. It's the experience that he has, right? Like that, if anything, that's what you're kind of getting. But you don't just. So this is something that a lot of the day, I saw back in the day, people would hire somebody in North America just because they're European or just because they're Korean,
I have to
and I'm
send this
sure
to
that
TL with Mari.
Uh, I mean, I couldn't possibly comment, right? I know that Mario, but yeah, I mean, like, you bring in a coach, you need to think, what kind of a project are we running? Okay, then what type of coach do I need, right? And this is something that I think that TL this year, at least, have been very, very smart about. They've had an excellent coach in the academy system, who I think has been the best coach in academy for years, which is of course Spawn, right?
Yeah.
Um, and they brought up youngsters, put them in a system under a rookie head coach in with these veteran players, and then just expect everything to just work out. Like it's crazy, right? Like, and did Harry improve? Did Yon improve last year? I don't think they did.
No.
Um, if anything, they got worse, kind of, because when the pressure built up too much, they were just put in that kind of situation. And this is a team where the coach is important on the team, but at least you have a veteran who is well known for kind of bringing up talent and like looking after talent, like Core JJ, right? Imagine they didn't have Core JJ on that team. Holy moly, it would have been a complete disaster, right? But this is kind of the thing that I think orgs don't think about, right? What are we doing in a world where you sometimes don't even think about, back in back in the day, people were just putting five superstars together on a team and just expecting it to work, right? So if you're even with your player construction, you're doing even with your player construction, so your player roster construction, you're not making the right decisions there. How can you possibly hope to think about that in terms of coaching, right? This is the project that I have. Okay? So this is the coach that I need. Right? Like Mithy is fantastic strategic mind for the game, right? Maybe historically has not been the best player. I'm not saying he can't bring up rookies. I'm saying that as a coach, he's not the first person you would go as somebody to bring up rookies. He's somebody you have a really experienced team. You're going to put him there. He kind of amplifies the strategic knowledge that your team already has, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, this is Cloud9 making smart hiring decisions for the coach that they have, right? Historically, Cloud9 being a development team, but now they're going to have a veteran team. Okay, who's the coach that we have for the veteran team? We want a good strategic mind for the game. We want an ex-pro player because he'll have legitimacy with the players he's working with. Great. Put who's the best candidate we've had? I don't know what candidates apply for the Cloud9 position, right? Mithy is a really really good candidate, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why you see Cloud9 being so far ahead. It's not just because they have good ability to recognize young players. It's not just because they pay their academy players twice as much as every other team, so that they can always guarantee that they had the best guys in their academy setup. Um, it's because they have an idea. Okay, this is what our org wants to do. So this is the skill set we need to come and hire a coach. And normally Cloud9's hiring decisions on their coaches have been pretty good, right? Pretty good for what they wanted, right? And I think that the only org that I can see in North America that kind of made so it's funny because we mentioned when I was interviewing NA coaches, the one NA coach that really was impressive, uh, and was Thinkard, right? And of course Thinkard is now very successful. Now he's now been on NRG, but whenever you see a coach, you do open applications, and you see a successful coach, you do everything you can to kind of recommend. Um, People, but it was heartening to me to see that he actually was able to get a good position, right? Because it looked for a time like he wasn't going to get a good position afterwards, and NRG took a chance on him. And what was NRG's roster plan? It was we need to kind of build an identity. We need to go and have. It's not about micromanaging veterans. It's about taking people that have had maybe are undervalued because of past performances, and then building an identity out of them and making sure that they gel as a unit, right? And obviously, then we need to come and put. So we need somebody who can bring that, which is what ThinkCard provided, and we're going to go and put a lot of coaching around them to make sure that we can help them reach their kind of playing max capacity, right? So this is why CLG had like insane number of position coaches, and I think that this is going to hurt NRG going into this year that they've lost a lot of those position coaching. Um, I think people kind of always understate the impact of coaches, but like people are just automatically assuming that NRG are going to automatically be the best team in NA because they won in summer last year. But they forget that is SOAS. I don't think SOAS is on the team anymore. I
Really? I
just
don't think
just
they
couldn't.
sent something
Did,
saying
did,
goodbye. There was Mash and Demonte that they
no,
let go, but
yeah, is SOAS still there? If SOAS is still there, then it's good. You don't find information on position coaches. It's like okay, so I don't know whether Apollo's still there. I don't know whether SARS is still there. I don't know. I know Croissant is there, who is obviously very capable. I know that ThinkHard is there, who like I said, I've interviewed and I think he's really good. But like a lot of the things which made CLG successful last year was CLG, NRG,
mm-hmm.
like was the fact that they had all of these guys, right, who could add additional knowledge to. They had a very strong brain trust behind that team. Um, but yeah, I give two examples because when we say North America as a region doesn't do right by their coaches, well, some teams do, right, but not every team does, right. And I think it's important to to kind of make the distinction between North America, the region, which has the handicaps in place, right, which has the structural issues that make developing as a coach and finding good coaches hard, versus the individual decision making of the teams, right? Because the ecosystem, the way that we try to change the ecosystem is a slow process that takes many, many years to kind of shift. Whereas Teams just have to change their hiring strategy, right? And they can do
Mm-hmm.
that overnight, but you can't change the infrastructure issues, right? That takes a generation to shift.
I like that. I like how you put it. Systemic issues are there, but you can change what you're doing. In part two of this episode, we talk about the player side of the player coach dynamic, how to set up your players for success, especially if there's a mix of rookies and veterans, and we even talked about specific rosters like FlyQuest and Shopify. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out when that comes out. In the meantime, though, make sure to check out the interview I did with Kelsey Moser, who actually previously worked with Peter. It's really good. You'll definitely want to watch it.